Railway Conversations with Dr. Frank.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Railway Conversations with Doc Frank. I am your podcast host, Doc Frank, and my guest today is Rebecca Wont. She works for a major consultancy and is responsible for the transport market in Sydney. We are going to talk about her career in the railway industry that has saved her to a very senior position. And we're also talking about a specific career episode that she had, being responsible for the customer strategy of Sydney Metro. I hope you enjoyed the conversation, and as usual, if you like it, please share it with your friends. This podcast is not sponsored by third parties, but I do want to let you know that I'm offering arguably one of the best CBTC trainings in the world. It's now available in an online format. My iconic CBTC Kickstarter that has been around since 2014 has been completely reworked and expanded to become an online version of 30 video lessons that you can watch at any time, regardless of time zones where you are and when you prefer to get your training. In total, it's more than 11 hours of content. And apart from the training itself, there are many other things that are very useful. For example, I'm offering an immersion plan that gives you a very guided structure to progress throughout your training, that you can finish it in a finite time. There will be an online study group available. There are regular live coaching calls by myself to answer your questions there and then, and also give you some motivation to help you getting through the training. And then, of course, there is an alumni community that provides you with ongoing support on the training content after you finished your course. Most of this is unparalleled in the signaling training industry, and I can only warmly recommend it. And of course, the trademark of these training courses is that they are understandable by anyone, regardless of their prior signaling knowledge. You can register for this training on my portal, docfranktraining.podia.com. The course itself is then /CBTC Kickstarter, one word, -online 2023. But it's probably easier if you just go to the training portal and then search for this course. The portal again, it's docfranktraining.podia.com. I hope that you can benefit from this fantastic CBTC online training in the future. And for now, please enjoy my conversation with Rebecca Wont. Rebecca, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Doc. Great to be here.
Great. I'm very excited to have another female guest on the show. I was trying very hard to have a bit of a balance between male guests and female guests, but it seems that the women first want to see what this podcast is about before they come on the show. Yeah, so I'm very, very happy to have you.
Well, there's not as many women as men in our industry.
That's correct. Yeah, so you could say I'm kind of in line with the quota. Yeah, and I mean I find quotas a terrible word. Anyway, you have made quite a good career at your current position in GHD. You're responsible for the entire Sydney market for rail. That was my understanding. Can you explain a little bit how that career path went, how you basically came up to such high levels in the industry?
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. So I look after the transport market, which includes rail and metro. For GHD in Sydney, it's a really, really great job. But in order to get where I am today, it has involved a lot of experience and a lot of different roles and in different parts of the transport business. So when I was just reflecting a bit about this conversation today, I mean, I certainly had that experience largely client side and in the government sector, and then some private experience and across design, construct, operations, and other areas like customer. But certainly got an opportunity as a graduate graduate engineer in the New South Wales Authority for Rail at the time, and from there just had lots of different experiences. So have had asset management and maintenance opportunities to help install bridges and replace track, to be a project manager for signalling and overhead wiring and all sorts of things. But I mean, we touched on a little bit earlier around having done the MBA, which I did, and it's well worth just telling that story if you don't mind.
Absolutely not. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah. So look, I was doing a lot of track renewals and maintenance type projects, and quite often I was wondering why we were replacing bridges or why we were upgrading track, and I really wanted to get an understanding of the financial or economic decision making around those asset renewal programs in track and rail, and so that led me to go and do an MBA, and I also sought a role out in the portfolio management office for Rail Corp at the time. It became Sydney Trains. And so I did my MBA because I wanted to really understand about that investment decision making. What I really learned in the MBA was that it was all about customer. And so if you designed or delivered a product or a service with the customer in mind, that you're really on the right foot. So I then found myself leading some customer programs, significant transformation projects with customer at the centre. And that opened quite a lot of doors doing that MBA.
Since you mentioned customer, that kind of triggers my next question, if you like, or the beginning of the next conversation topic. I'm not so much into question and answer style. We both worked at Sydney Metro at some stage together, and we crossed paths a few times in a big office. That's just what happens. Several years ago, that was way before COVID, around 2015, 2016. And your role at Sydney Metro was responsible for customer strategy. I must admit that's the only time so far that I've seen somebody being responsible for customer strategy. And given that Sydney Metro was an entirely new railway system from the ground up, I'm extremely interested, and I hope that many listeners are as well. What's behind that customer strategy thing, and how did you approach that?
Look, it was quite a new role, and it was the first of its type. And so it was at a time when Transport New South Wales had a motto or a vision around customers at the centre of everything that we do. So it was well in line to bring a role that advocated for customer outcomes in Sydney Metro because it was a new product and service for the people of metropolitan Sydney at the time. Interestingly, when I got the role, I did ask Fred Staples, who was the program director at that time, and on my first day I had a chat with Rod, and it might have been the first week, but I chatted and said, how did you come to think about a role for customer strategy? And the story, as I recall him telling me, was that on the airport line, where both Rod and I was a construction engineer on the New South Wales Rail Link, or the airport link, and Rod was on the other side of the table to where I was working, but he told me the story of how potentially that particular new line might have better served customers and created places. And so when he set up the structure, he immediately thought of having a person accountable for customer and the outcomes for customer, and then also precincts and transport integration. So he set up a client team. It was an excellent role. The purpose for the role was really, there was a number of purposes, but one of those was to make sure that we got the patronage or plan and work around a product that was seamless, so that we got the patronage that the business case had forecast, which was a significant patronage. Fortunately, we got that and then some, but what I was able to do was set the first strategy for customers in transport. As I took it at the time, I remember taking that strategy to the Deputy Secretary of Transport then, Tony Braxton Smith, if you're listening, Tony, hello. and to set an easy door-to-door customer experience for Sydney Metro, and that set the forward, I guess, the approach for the Metro lines going forward. But that was excellent because I got to contribute to the design of the train, the design of the stations, and the design of operations, the digital experience, the brand, getting people to and from the stations as well, so advocating for an easy customer experience for people to get to those stations. So we knew that we only had a certain number of car spots. I think it was 4,000 car spots. So the opportunity was, how are we going to build patronage by looking at the integrated transport model, which was, making sure we could get buses to the station and walking and cycling to the stations as well. So it was a really, really wonderful opportunity to shape customer experience, and a real highlight for me in my career to date.
I think just the idea to think about customer strategy and thinking about the customer experience is a worthwhile exercise in itself, because most other railways, they are just used to keep trains running on time. And they basically say, okay, well, as long as the trains run on time, passengers will certainly be happy. Well, they will be happier than if the trains are not running on time. So that's a true statement. But I found it interesting that you said you were involved in the station design. If you have a train station and the only way to get into the train station has you crossing a 6-lane road where you risk your life, then the whole fun of the railway journey becomes much, much less. Yeah. So, and
that's right.
So these things really need to be considered as well, like how people, that last mile thing, how do people come to the train in the first place? Yeah, and
that's exactly right. Yeah, that's right. So I mean, there's a lot of research done about it, but we know that there's some things that really customers care about: timeliness and safety and security and reliability. Timeliness and reliability, we know that people care a lot about that, but that we always need to design with the customer's needs in mind. And part of that timeliness is if it takes them 3 to 4 minutes to cross the road or wait for traffic lights, or it's dangerous in the meantime, how do you make it as easy and seamless? And so we created personas. So we looked at 4 different customer types and designed those through research. But we wanted to make sure that whether you were able-bodied or not, whether you were English-speaking or not, whether you're a mother with a pram or a carer pushing, a wheelchair or a pram, that this station and this product and service would serve you. I think one of the things I love about rail is, it is very much a way of connecting people, and quite often the people who need public transport like rail and trains, they're dependent on that transport to connect with the people that they love and the jobs and the opportunities and the healthcare. So it's critical that it's it's designed for everybody. So we worked really hard to do that.
Yeah, signposting is an important factor as well, since you just mentioned a persona that doesn't speak English. Yeah, so especially since we talked about the airport line, there are lots of tourists coming into Sydney, and not all of them may be like this fluent in English. And I mean, choosing the train to get from the airport into the city is certainly a good thing. But if you can't find the train to start with, or you can't find how to buy a ticket for the train and all these kind of things. Yeah. So working with symbols and having proper signage, like basically putting yourself in the shoes of the passengers, like, okay, they come out of the airport terminal. Where are they looking? Yeah. How are they going to find the train station or the access to the train station? And how do they go on from here? What about their luggage? Are the escalators wide enough that you can have your two big trolleys and still like don't have to take them on your head or something like that? So
yeah, it's really right. So look, the testing that we did, 2015, that's nearly 7 years ago, 7 years ago now. The more recent testing that we're doing is we're actually looking, we're able to measure people's eyes, like where people's eyes are going and how many times they turn their head to be able to find their way through. So the amount of research and testing that we're doing is really improving navigate their way through a grayscale 3D model of the station just to see how they were feeling and how easy it was. And indeed, we changed things like escalator orientations through to make sure it was as easy as possible. And I'm really thrilled at Central Station that's just opened parts of it now, but part of the customer experience was to make sure that we got light down as far as possible down to those new platforms so that people felt safe and secure. We know that people can use that natural light to navigate and feel safe, and so the experience now it's with intent. It was really carefully considered.
Did you come up with all these ideas yourself, or did you kind of model, or did you get some inspirations from other metros around the world?
No, look, we had a really great team that brought different ideas and different ways of doing work. So the ideas around things like customer experience design and customer strategy, we leveraged all sorts of ideas. At the heart of our strategy was making sure that we were testing with customers, maybe because we were designing with customers. And at the time, there was certainly a few studios that were expert at that. But also, I think part of my inspiration and part of my experience was from the program that I had led prior to my joining Sydney Metro, where I did customer information program for Sydney Trains, and in that we designed the first real-time app. But through that work, we had a consultant in with us that I learned a lot from, and we brought customers in the room to get their feedback and to understand what was important. Then we did customer research, which taught us about how customers valued safety and security, timeliness, reliability, etc. So I sort of brought a lot of ideas from some of the other programs and the other ways of working that I'd used previously. But at the heart of it, I will tell a little story. At the heart of it was really about designing for people by testing with those users and doing that as well as we could. But one thing I'll never forget, I've worked with many wonderful architects in Sydney Metro, and one of them said to me while we were going through a customer testing and walking them through a 3D model of the station, and one of them said, Rebecca, as an architect, I always thought I designed for people, but she said, now I really know that we're designing for people and we're watching these people navigate their way through, and we're seeing that they're confused, they're finding it difficult, or they're getting lost, and so that was a real, I'll never forget that comment going, we thought we designed for customers, but actually now we're really, really designing for customers. So it was that technique of customer-centered design that we brought to life. But it was a team, and it was leveraging from industry experts outside of transport. So not so much other rail, other countries. It was more test with people and then iterate the design.
Okay, so if you didn't take your inspirations from other countries, what about the other way around? Have there been any other metros coming to Sydney and saying, hey, what you're doing here is really, really good? Can you teach us or present? Did you present on conferences and found some wider interest there?
Frank, I have to say, when I left Metro, anybody on this call working in government, I think one of my biggest regrets was not being more outward focused. Spent a lot of time. We worked in the Metro office. There was a lot of time, developing up requirements, getting contracts written with the customer in mind, setting up approaches and ways of working to make sure that we got the customer in. One of my regrets was that we didn't share a lot of this work the way that we ought to have. So look, in my role now, I am able to share with GHD and some of our clients, whether they're in New Zealand, Melbourne or Brisbane, we certainly share these ways of working now. I'm able to take that experience to our clients. But yeah, there wasn't a lot at that time.
Yeah, maybe that's a bit of a general thing that customer or government organizations aren't that outspoken, and the kind of marketing they do is more internally. I mean, I always admired, since you mentioned Rod Staples, what a great job he did, or he must have done, with internal marketing inside the New South Wales government. Because if you look at it, the second line of Sydney Metro was basically funded before the first line even entered service, years before the first line entered service. So basically just on the back of a promise what Sydney Metro would do for the population of Sydney, and on the basis, of course, of meeting continuously construction milestones on the way. So Sydney Metro, especially Northwest, was one of the most reliable projects that I have ever seen. And I tell you a story as well. The first time I met Rod Staples was when he worked in an organization called the Sydney Metro Authority. I'm not sure whether you ever heard of that. So there was a first attempt in Sydney to build a metro underneath the city center, which was called CBD Metro at the time. That was in 2009 and 10. And the project actually was abandoned after a sudden change in government. And the new government wasn't that much into it and pulled the plug just before the tenders came out. So I remembered a meeting with Leslie Linger, who was the head of the Sydney Metro Authority at the time, and Rod was his right-hand man who later took over when Les retired. And they started every meeting with industry with a list of achieved milestones over the last 6 months. And the second slide, always in every presentation, was a list of the planned milestones for the next 6 months, with the conclusion, and we're going to meet all of them as well. Obviously, on the first slide, they met all those milestones. So it wasn't made up. They really did meet the milestones. So the planning was so good, and the focus on achievement of these milestones was so determined and so thorough that they actually met all those things. If anything, they finished something earlier, like the tunnel boring, for example, I believe ended earlier than planned on Sydney Metro Northwest. And apparently the government under Gladys Berejiklian as transport minister and later premier was so impressed by that they just kept throwing money at Metro, and now it's growing and growing and growing. And you see the same again, where the government basically says, okay, we're going to build the line to the Western Sydney Airport. And just recently they said, and there will be 4 more extensions where you can really see the network coming together, all with just one relatively short line being in service. And the second line still takes another year, like City and Southwest, I think, is planned for 2024. So if a project can really do some proper internal marketing and basically keeping the promises to the government, that takes them a long way to keep receiving support, and
look, that's exactly right. And there's a really good leader, and communication was internally it was fantastic, and he really built up a great team, and it was a really great project to be part of. Absolutely.
Yeah, it was almost a pity when he got promoted. When he took over the whole transport for New South Wales, I thought, well, on the one hand, that was a sensible step. On the other hand, it was certainly a loss for the Sydney Metro organization. I mean, there were good people coming after him, but still, it's I think he was quite outstanding in that role. He really was. Good. I'm just watching the time. You said you've got a chock-a-block calendar, so I want to make sure that I'm not stretching your time more than what's good for me and what's good for you and your clients. I would like to thank you for your time. I think even though it was a rather short conversation compared to all the other episodes, I hope it was a very insightful one. Because one, it wasn't just about signaling. So I got criticized that a lot of my podcast episodes are very much signaling centric, and that's because that's my background. But this one, I don't think we talked about any signaling, apart from you said you managed a signaling project once at Raycorp. Yeah, and
right. Hey, if we've got a sector, Frank, I know you can edit this touch, but I would love to touch on the women in rail.
Please.
If we've got a minute.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just go ahead. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So I think one of the passions of mine is advocating for inclusion and diversity, and I think at this stage of our maturity in diversity and inclusion in rail, there's a real focus on bringing women into our industry, and if there's anybody out there who's thinking about joining rail, there's a lot of great opportunities, whether they're technical or non-technical, and operations, design, construction. Currently, we've got, I think, something like 24% participation by females, and what I would just ask is that people give and welcome diversity into our industry. So, how can we all make people feel welcome? How can we open doors to give people opportunities? It's certainly something that I had the privilege of, doing some roles that I might not have been 100% ready for throughout my career, from a graduate, through to later, but really looking for that advocacy and supporting diversity through welcoming people. So, as the chair of Women in Rail for the Australian Rail Association, there's quite a lot of effort going into this space at the moment. Last week we had a really great conversation in Victoria for Women in Rail lunch that the ARA put on, and we're sharing stories through events like that, where we have a panel of speakers talking to us about their experience, the good, the bad, and everything in between. So, look, if you've got any women or diverse applicants, bring them in, make them welcome. We have got a shortfall in our industry of candidates and people to do the projects that are ahead of us, and the merrier.
Thank you very much. I think that was a very good addition. I'm trying my best in this podcast here to create diversity as well between younger members of the industry and more experienced ones, and then also gender-wise between men and women. And I'm really hoping that interviews like the one with you today have a little bit of a snowball effect, where other women said, oh, there are women on the podcast. And I'm also, of course, hoping that you may refer me to some other potential guests, especially through your role as the chairperson of Women in Rail. That would be really good. And by doing so, that basically helps, together with me providing a platform on this podcast, that we get more women to talk, that we can present more variety of different roles and different jobs where women can get to in rail, as can men. But I mean, for women, it may be a little bit more stereotyped that certain roles are more suitable than others, which I think is nonsense. And the more we can present that variety, the more we can demonstrate that it's really nonsense. So
That's
again,
exactly right. And when you talk to people, you often, I had a conversation last week, and someone asked me how I got into rail, and most of it that you ask, it's a little bit by chance. So it's something that you come across, you get into it, and then you really, really, really enjoy it, which I do. So, and all my colleagues and friends who've been in rail for a long time too are there because of it.
Yeah, it is a great industry. Yes, it is a great industry. So thank you again for your time, and for all the listeners. As usual, if you liked that episode, I hope you appreciated that was something about the wider rail context, not just signaling. I hope to get more of this in the future, but it also depends on what kind of caliber of guests I'm getting. And Rebecca, fortunately, didn't have so much of a signaling background, but more of a wider railway background with that very interesting point of customer strategy, which I think is relative, I wouldn't say unique, but rather rare, and therefore I hope interesting for other railways to adopt. And as usual, if you like it, then please tell your friends about it, share it, and until next time, keep it simple, and bye for now. Hi, this is Doc Frank. I'm jumping in again to tell you about something very special, not to myself only, but to the entire CBTC industry. It's the very first virtual global conference on the topic of CBTC. It's called the CBTC World Summit 2023. It's going to take place in September this year on the 20th and 21st. And I'm telling you about it already so that you can make space in your calendars because you don't want to miss this event. There will be 3 sessions over the course of 2 days in 3 different global regions at the local daytimes. So they will come up at some odd hours during the night, at least some of those sessions, but it doesn't matter. You can still attend all of the presentations because they will all be recorded and are available for replay. The entire thing will be really big. It's a cast of 18 international speakers from all kinds of countries, and I will have them presenting really extraordinary topics related to CBTC. I will tell you more about this over the coming months, but for now, just mark the dates in your calendar. And if you like, you can also register on my training portal, which is docfranktraining.podia.com/Summit 23. I repeat that, docfranktraining.podia.com/Summit 23. I look forward to seeing you at this fantastic World First conference. And for now, keep it simple and bye for now.